Next is competition. I'm sure everybody understands the traditional definition of competition, where you're basically fighting over the same thing. This comes from a fundamental niche overlap when you have two or more species using the same limited resource. It even can occur with plants. You have some plants that release toxins into the soil, which doesn't affect the plant that's releasing the toxin, but it does prevent other species from living there. Now, there's two studies that I'm going to go through quickly on competition. The first one is by Russian ecologists that studied competition in a lab. He basically looked at two species of paramecium. Um, he looked at them separately and in different combinations. Paramecium eat bacteria. So you have Paramecium caudatum and Paramecium aurelia. When you separate them and they're growing in their own test tube, they both thrive and grow no problem. But as soon as you mix them together, caudatum always died out. Why? Because it wasn't as good of a competitor when it comes to preying on bacteria than aurelia was. So aurelia, a better predator, and I don't have the graph, so forget that. When you have an example like that, when you mix two species and one species basically just gets completely outcompeted and therefore die out, that is called competitive exclusion, where you have one species completely eliminated from a community because they just can't compete for that resource. That means that one species is more efficient at using that resource and they cannot coexist. That has a reproductive advantage for the species that is a better competitor because obviously they will be able to survive and reproduce. The other study is with Joseph Connell. He looked at barnacles. Remember these guys, barnacles? And I'm basically just going to go through and show you based on this picture because it's pretty straightforward. So you have, and these names are ridiculous, you have Balanus and Thalamus, okay? So Balanus are the orange dudes and Thalamus are the white dudes. So I'm just going to call them orange and white because I don't want to keep saying Balanus and Thalamus because I'm going to end up, I already screwed it up. Thamulus. Balanus, Thamulus. Orange and white, okay? Orange and white. All right. So how this experiment worked is that Connolly actually transferred some of the white down to the bottom because it turned out that the white ones can grow in this entire community. So you see we got low tides and high tides. So during high tides, this upper zone becomes dry and the orange guys cannot survive in that kind of environment. They always need to be underwater. So the orange dudes are completely restricted to living within an area that is always covered in water. But the white guys can live everywhere. The problem is when the white guys are transferred to the bottom, they're outcompeted by the orange guys. So they're restricted to only the place where it gets dry sometimes because they can survive in the dry environment. Again, this competitive exclusion. Okay, the reason why competition is so important is because it literally structures the community. So we have competitive exclusion. Competitors can also evolve niche differences or even structural differences. Yes, you can actually adapt and evolve as a species to form literally different physical structures. Where the ranges of competitors overlap is where you have the biggest differences. That's called character displacement. So here we have these birds. These are Darwin's finches. So when Charles Darwin went overseas on the boat and he was like looking around and studying and he looked at how the earth changes and he figured, well, if the earth can change over time, then why can't the organisms also evolve to change over time? Anyway, so what he noticed was that, let's say you have, here's island A and here's island B. And when you have species 1 and species 2 living on different islands, they have the same size beak. Because remember the beak size, so you have a bird with a beak. Yeah, I know. Super, super great illustrations. There's a big beak, and here's a bird with a tiny beak. Yeah. So this dude's going to be able to eat bigger seeds than this dude is. So what he notices is that if species 1 and species 2 are living on different islands, they have the same size beak. But if you have island C and you have species 1 and species 2 living on the same island, they actually have different size beaks. Even though these guys are the same species as these in here as well, but one of the two species actually changed, like not overnight, of course, but evolved over time to have a totally different sized beak. That is character displacement. Okay, so I should emphasize. The whole point of character displacement and competitive exclusion is that it reduces competition. Okay, make sure I had to say that. Okay, when you have species that are closely related and have the same resource, that is where competition is the most intense. So some species can resort to something called resource partitioning. Now, this is a bird called a warbler, and you have a warbler that lives in a tree. I don't have brown, but I do have green. So basically what these guys do is that they partition the tree. So warbler species A, B, and C, they basically stick to their own area of the tree to look for insects and seeds or whatever so that they don't overlap. That's resource partitioning. Basically just dividing up your resource.